Hello and welcome to the Kitchen Table Theology podcast, where each week, Pastor Jeff Cranston explores biblical theology that provides practical life applications in an understandable way. Thanks for joining us at the table. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Kitchen Table Theology podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Coker. As part of our Denominational Distinctive series, we've been interviewing pastors and denominational leaders from many of the major Protestant denominations in order to learn more about their beliefs, the histories, and their theological distinctions. Today, we're going to focus our discussion and wrap up our study of the Wesleyan Church. My dad, Pastor Jeff, had the opportunity to interview Dr. Bob Black. He is an ordained minister with the Wesleyan Church and a professor of religion at Southern Wesleyan University. If you missed that interview, I would recommend go back and listen to it. It was episodes 248 and 249. And we appreciate Dr. Black being on here. But Dad, let's go ahead and jump in. Oh, and let's mention too, this is our 250th episode on Kitchen Table Theology. So that's exciting.
No, that's a lot. I'm just sitting here thinking that's a lot of podcasts.
That is
250. When we started out in April of 2020, I remember I set a goal to do 25.
You crushed it.
We crushed that one. Yeah, we got right through it. And I looked earlier today. I told Tiffany, Kitchen Table Theologian, we're coming up on 108,000 downloads, which, again, still so hard for us to believe. But thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of the Kitchen Table Theology community. Mm-hmm. I met an individual in church Sunday who was visiting from out of town, 2 states away, and came up and told me how grateful he was and how appreciative he was for Kitchen Table Theology. And it's always astounding to me how did you find out about it? Because there's no connection at all with me or our church at Low Country Community Church or anything like that. So it just has a breadth that we never anticipated, but we are very, very grateful for it.
Yes, absolutely. So let's wrap up our discussion of the Wesleyan Church. Dad, get us started here. You and Dr. Black had a great conversation. Just sort of recap for us a little bit the history of the Wesleyan Church, because I know there is a lot of history in there. So just give us a brief overview.
Yeah, I really enjoyed my time interviewing Dr. Black and Kitchen Table Theologian. I hope you not only enjoyed those 2 podcasts, but benefited from them and walk away with a little bit more knowledge and information about, the I don't know whether you call it a potpourri or a kaleidoscope or whatever the American church is these days, but all these different hues and colors and flavors that make up the Christian church in America. And of course, the Wesleyans add to that. One thing that I think is pretty cool, and they say this on their Wesleyan denominational website, the Wesleyan Church is the result of an 18th century revival, 2 19th century movements, and a 20th century merger. Strong roots which sustain a 21st century vision for spiritual transformation across North America and around the world. So, yeah, their roots go back quite a ways, and they, of course, point to their founder. One of the key individuals would be John Wesley, mm-hmm. along with his brother Charles Wesley, who John had the famous conversion on Aldersgate Street in London all the way back in 1738. And that was a catalyst for a revival in not only Great Britain, but America, and just of absolutely historic proportions. And out of that, you have various, I would think probably dozens around the world, if not more than that, of denominations and groups that count Wesley as a founder. And there are so many different stripes of Methodism. And so the Wesleyans came out of Methodism, and which again goes way back to the Wesley brothers. And Dr. Black was talking about this a great deal there. In America, there were the Wesleyan Methodists, And then they eventually formed with a group called, I can't exactly remember whether they were called Pilgrim Methodists or something along those lines. Maybe you will remember Pilgrim Holiness Church. Maybe that was it. And then in 1968, those two groups combined to become what we know today as the Wesleyan Church, that denomination. But always a part of social reform movements, very proud of that, very active in the Underground Railroad during the days of slavery in the United States, ordained the first woman. I believe Dr. Black said that they think they ordained the first woman ever in America. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of history to them, and they continue on today with, tens of thousands of people in their churches, and they're in 99 countries. So this is just not a little denomination that's kind of stuck here in America with a couple of hundred churches around. They're in 99 different nations. So pretty impressive as they have gotten their denomination spread around the world as they spread the gospel around the world.
Awesome. Okay. So if I were to go to a Wesleyan church today, did you all discuss, maybe share a little bit with us, what it would look like if we went to church today, what the service would be like, the buildings, even if we talked to, I can't remember if y'all talked about that. We've interviewed so many different people. It's kind of all running together. Got to keep them straight here.
I believe we did, and you're being a little coy there. So why don't you tell us what it's like to attend a Wesleyan church, since you attend a Wesleyan church?
I say I do. It is. I don't know if it is very typical of all the Wesleyan churches across America or in all of these different 99 countries, but very similar, I think, to Low Country Community Church.
I mean, extremely similar.
Very similar.
And I think the answer is very similar to what it has been with most of these denominational interviews, is that it depends on the church you walk into.
Right.
What type of service. They run everything from traditional and even maybe leaning a tad bit toward the liturgical. You could find that in some Wesleyan churches, to very modern, very contemporary, with worship and praise bands and all of that kind of thing. And others will have a choir and a piano and an organ. But the thing that unites them is their Wesleyan theology and some of the distinctives of all of that. So as Dr. Black was unpacking that, we learned a great deal about, what they believe. We talked about prevenient grace. And so there's some things that, that's a distinctive for them. Salvation is something. So if you kitchen table theologian understand a little bit about theology, they would be more Arminian in their theology. And maybe one day we should do a podcast on Arminianism and that sort of thing. But, another thing too, I want to bring out, they were one of the first denominations to give the laity. And so the laity, if that's an unfamiliar term to you, kitchen table theologian, there's the clergy, which tend to be the set apart, ordained ministers of a church. And then the normal people are called the laity. The clergy, we're the abnormal people. But, it's a distinction I really do not like at all. There shouldn't be a big distinction between clergy and laity. We just have different roles, but we're all on equal footing before the cross. But the laity have always been given significant roles in the Wesleyan Church in their leadership. And I think that stems from they have always been committed to helping. And this goes back to John and Charles Wesley again, to helping people who are maybe undervalued, a little marginalized in society. You go back to slavery. To say that they were marginalized is almost laughable. I mean, they were so beyond marginalized, right, as a slave. Mm-hmm. But they've always had a real heart and a compassionate action type of corporate heart to reach people who were not being reached by anyone else. And so they made it important very early on that laity are going to be very, very involved in the leadership of the Wesleyan churches.
While we're discussing that, give us a sort of a broad overview picture here of the polity of the Wesleyan Church. How is it set up? Do they have, I think there's maybe like a district board. Is there a national level board? I know other denominations that we have discussed, each church is sort of on its own, but I think in the Wesleyan Church, they're more a part of a formalized organization. So share with us, Dad, how that denomination is set up, their leadership system.
That's a question that we should have talked about, you asking me beforehand, because I'm trying to remember. So I think rather than be wrong, I should go, like, I know that there's a pastor of the local church, or many pastors, depending on the size of it. And there is someone who serves in sort of a bishop role, or a superintendent role, someone who oversees a number of churches, and they are that's geographically driven. Mm-hmm. And then there is the national office. And so those superintendents are in charge of those districts, or acting in the role of a bishop. They're under a person or two at the national level. So there is a hierarchical, I think, structure, but I would think I think they would say it's fairly simple. It's not very involved. You don't have right reverends and high holy this and, all of these names and titles. They tend to keep it fairly simple and clean.
Yes.
So I would recommend, if that's a driving question for you, Kitchen Table Theologian, go back.
Sorry I threw you off there, but I do think you answered it pretty well. There is a local board administration for each maybe individual church. There is a district. Yes. So there is a hierarchy there's always someone sort of at the next level.
And, I think refer to. People talk about hierarchies in church, and, well, that's not, some people could say that's not biblical, but I think it's just a matter of necessity. Mm-hmm. When you have that many churches, that many people, hundreds of thousands of people, and you've got a worldwide ministry going on, you have to organize it.
Yes.
And if you don't, it's utter chaos. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that they, are beyond ever changing, but, you find what works for you and you do that. And most denominations are set up that in that very same way, for the simple reason is that it's helpful when it works.
Yes. We could maybe call it more of its organizational structure rather than a hierarchy, but just there is an organizational structure, and there are different levels of boards and districts, all those different kinds of things. So the church is not, I think maybe the point of that being, the church is not out there solely on its own. It has support. There are other ministry leaders and other positions to be there as the pastors need that support. So, all right, let's wrap it up here, Dad. You mentioned maybe one or two distinctives that set the Wesleyan Church apart. I know you mentioned salvation is a key thing for them. Wrap it up here for us with just what stood out to you, what is distinct about the Wesleyan Church that separates it from other Protestant denominations.
Well, I'm ready for you on this one.
Okay, great.
This question. Well, and here we're recording, by the way, Kitchen Table Theologian, it's 2:35 in the afternoon. I've got a full cup of Southern Pecan coffee in front of me, and my mind's still not working correctly. But, one of the things that I learned, which I didn't know, and I don't know of any other denominations. I've not heard of another denomination practicing this, but I thought it was fascinating. When we started talking about baptism, Dr. Black shared that they baptize believers, and they also will baptize infants, or give the parents the option for their child to not be baptized, but to be dedicated to the Lord rather than baptized. And that the method of baptism, or the mode of baptism, goes from sprinkling to pouring to immersion. So they don't limit themselves to one particular way to baptize people. But he did say that the vast majority of the baptisms performed, except for infant baptism, would be, with adults, would be by immersion, where people get in the water and go all the way under the water. Also, I think, just to touch on that prevenient grace again, the way that often gets defined is that God shows grace to all of humanity, to every person, by repairing, I think we can say it this way, by repairing their will, which they believe was damaged in the fall. So our free will, which was damaged by the fall. That's the Genesis 3, the creation, right? The fall of Adam and Eve into sin. And then we are free to receive Christ, or we are free to reject Christ. So that stands in marked opposition to Calvinism, which certainly would not teach anything regarding that. So they still see human choice, though, as an act of God's grace. So God is, and that has to do with salvation. They have been, Wesley was, I should say, accused of teaching Christian perfectionism, that here on earth, walking with Christ, you could achieve sinlessness. But that's not a doctrine that they hold to. I don't even think Wesley held to that. But they do teach that a Christian can become fully mature. And sometimes that's called entire sanctification. And while Christians would not become fully sinless in this life, they could become fully mature in Christ, wholly devoted to loving God, wholly devoted to loving their neighbor. And I've never thought about that before, but when it's stated like that, I think I don't have any problem with that. I think that's what we certainly should all be striving toward.
Right.
Now, whether that is possible in its entirety before we die, I don't know. But it certainly should be, as one of the key words in the book of Hebrews is the Greek word telos, which means goal. That ought to be our telos. That ought to be our goal, what we're striving toward. And so those are some things I think that are pretty distinctive within the Wesleyan Church denomination. Good people. Awesome. You and I know many of them.
I do,
and
yeah.
I have a very good friend who's been a Wesleyan pastor for many, many years. And, although he's horribly wrong in some areas, I'm still his friend. No, he's not. I'm just messing around. But yeah, good folks with a wonderful historic background and history. It was really a pleasure to talk to Dr. Black. We're very grateful for the time he gave us.
Yes. All right, Kitchen Table Theologian, that will wrap up our talks on the Wesleyan Church. I hope you've learned something. And if you want to do more of your own research, we definitely encourage that. We really do just want to say thank you so much for listening to the Kitchen Table Theology podcast with Pastor Jeff. And as he mentioned at the beginning, you all are helping us get the word out there, and other people are finding Kitchen Table Theology. We love that, and we appreciate that. Leaving a rating or a review really does help get the word out there. So if you have a minute and can do that today, we would love that too. You can email us anytime if you have any questions. It is pastorjeff@lowcountrycc.org. You can also find today's episode notes and more at jeffcranston.com. As always, thanks are due to our friends at Low Country Community Church here in Bluffton, South Carolina, for making this podcast possible. Until next time, always remember that the real power of theology is not only knowing it, but applying it. Thanks for joining us at the table.
You've been listening to the Kitchen Table Theology podcast with Pastor Jeff Cranston. Join us next time for more insights into biblical truth. If you'd like to know more on today's topic, please check out our show notes. If you have a question from today's podcast, kindly email us at pastorjeff@lowcountrycc.org. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you consider leaving a rating and review? We deeply appreciate your help in getting the word out. And be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or in your favorite podcasting app to continue this journey with us as we learn about and apply God's Word to our lives. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time here at Kitchen Table Theology.